A man that was feeling edgy one day decided to take a nice hot bath, and he just made himself comfortable in the bathtub when all of a sudden the doorbell rang. So he reluctantly got up, put a bathrobe on and put a towel on his head, put on some slippers, went downstairs. And this was an older story. There was a salesman at the door, and once he knew it was a salesman, he slammed the door and went back up to his bathtub. And again, he made himself comfortable when again the doorbell rang. Well, he got up again, put on his slippers and robe and all that, but then he stepped onto a little puddle that he had left from the first time he got out of the bathtub, and so he slipped, fell, and hit the back of his head on the porcelain bathtub. Well, with all of his might, he eventually got himself together and got himself clothed and drove himself to the doctor. And the doctor examined him in the emergency room and said, "You didn't break anything. I think you're going to be okay. Just relax. Why don't you just go home and take a good hot bath?" Sometimes a warm bath or a restful time like that could do wonder for you. Maybe being in the pool, a nice hot day, brings you refreshment, you know. But they don't fix everything. And maybe Matthew had one of those things that a hot bath just couldn't fix. He had an onerous job. He was hated for the job he had. Well, first of all, none of us like tax collectors, right? But in Matthew's case, he was a Jew by background. In one of the Gospels, his other Jewish name was Levi, a very Jewish name. And because he was a Jew collecting taxes for the Roman government, he was considered like, a Benedict Arnold, a traitor. And so he was despised by everybody because he was a tax collector, and by religious folks most definitely for being a betrayer of the people. And not only that, Matthew didn't get an hourly wage or a salary. He was just told that he had to collect a certain amount of money, and whatever more he collected than that was his wage. And so he often took from others more tax money than he needed to. So he was very despised. I don't know if Matthew was looking forward to a job change in order to get away from being hated by his own people. Or maybe he did enjoy the wonderful job and the money, and he probably lived pretty wealthy in that town. Maybe he didn't want to get away from that life. But all things changed when Jesus came by one day. You know, that's the story of a lot of people. Whether they were going through tough times or good times, life was a certain way, and then Jesus came by. One day, Jesus came to his life, and things changed. You know, that's the story for many people who come to know Jesus later in life, don't they? In fact, we're going to show in a couple of minutes here a little clip from The Chosen about the call of Matthew. But in The Chosen, there's this one dialogue between Mary Magdalene, who had a very dark past, as portrayed by The Chosen. And she's telling the rabbi about her change and said, "Well, all I can say is I was one way, and now I'm different. And the thing that happened in between is him." That's a lot of people's story. And you know, even if you were raised in the Christian church, I bet you have a story too that say, well, maybe it goes something like this. There's never been a time I didn't know Jesus and his love. My Christian parents made sure I knew that. My Sunday school teachers made me know that. Confirmation, my pastor made me know that. But there came a time in my life when Jesus really came by into my life. And maybe it was a sad time, maybe it was a good time, but when he came by, all things changed. I'd like to let you see how the call of Matthew takes place in the movie series called The Chosen. And you'll see a lot of the historical, cultural context that comes out in the conversations that are happening in this little clip, and by the reaction of the apostles, the disciples, when Jesus calls Matthew. So be looking at some people's faces as we play the call of Matthew.
We live in the same world, Matthew.
Next.
Besides, what else are you going to do with a mind like yours?
Matthew. Matthew, son of Alphaeus.
Yes.
Follow me.
Me?
Yes, you.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. What are you doing? You want me to join you?
Keep moving, street preacher.
Do you have any idea what this guy's done? Do you even know him?
Yes.
Listen, I said to... What are you doing? Where do you think you're going?
Guys, let me go.
Have you lost your mind? You have money. Quintus protects you. No Jew lives as good as you. You're gonna throw it all away.
Yes. I don't get it.
You didn't get it when I chose you either.
But this is different. I'm not a tax collector.
Get used to different.
I'm glad we passed by your booth today, Matthew.
Yes.
Shall we? We have a celebration to prepare for.
You will regret this, Matthew.
What's the tablet for? I grabbed it without thinking. You can put it back.
No, keep it. You may yet find use for it.
Where are we going?
A dinner party.
I'm not welcome at dinner parties.
Well, that's not going to be a problem tonight. You're the host.
And Matthew did host a party where he invited all his friends. Well, when you're a despised Jewish tax collector, your friends are other tax collectors, right? Boys that were now serving the Roman government, and also the young ladies who were servicing the Jewish girls that were servicing the Roman soldiers, the prostitutes, or the prostituted. They were all at that party when Jesus was invited. I remember Paula from my first church, my second church, it was in Boston. She had a lot of family in the area, so she invited her friends to a party at her house, and she invited her church people for the practical reason to get the church people to meet her family, right? So we got there a little bit late, or everybody else got there early or on time, and I got there and I said, well, I wonder who else is here from church, you know? So I met some of Paula's relatives outside, and sure enough, inside in a room all by themselves were my church people, you know? Not doing a lot of worldly good right there. They were all there, you know? And they missed the opportunity to mix it up with Paula's relatives who were invited to meet the church people, you know? What a missed opportunity, and I'm sure Paula was disappointed. You know, when you bring somebody to church, do introduce them to some other church people. And when you do see people there at church, do get to know them a little bit, you know. And Matthew wasn't told by Jesus, go do this, although the chosen kind of portrays it that way. It just says in the Bible, Matthew threw a party, invited Jesus and the disciples and his friends. And it was at that party that Jesus said, I've been called not the righteous to follow me, but sinners. Many people have a story that said, I was one way and then another, but then Jesus came. A guy I've come to appreciate is a guy named Lee Strobel. Lee Strobel is one of our defenders of the faith. We call that an apologist, a great speaker. But he wasn't always the Christian that he is today and the writer of books that help us express our faith to others. He grew up Lutheran. Some of you know this story very well. He grew up Lutheran. And then after confirmation, he kind of wandered away from his childhood faith. Went to college, became an atheist, and that does happen, I guess. And then he became a Chicago Tribune investigative reporter. And life was fine in the suburbs, the northwest suburbs of Chicago. He and his wife had 2 kids, a nice house. Everything was going well until his wife started going to church. And then she started to wreck their life, their perfect life. But even before his wife went to church, that influenced him towards Christianity. He once interviewed a man named Bronsky, Ron Bronsky, in the city of Chicago. All right, Bronsky was a fraud. He wanted to be exposed. Lee wanted to expose Bronsky as a fraud. You see, this guy was a great criminal in Chicago. Many people referred to him when he was arrested as a sociopath or just mere garbage. However, Lee heard a different story when he spoke to a pastor who had met Bronsky after his conversion. And he referred to the former gang member as one of the most nicest, beautiful, loving people that I know. So Ron Bronsky, when he was brought before trial many years later, he had such a change of heart that was evident that the police officers, the prosecutor, and even the judge who had gotten to know him set him free and greatly reduced his sentence. And now Bronsky runs an inner city ministry for kids. What happened? He was one way, and then Jesus came into his life, and his life changed. Maybe that's your story. Maybe you know people that's their story. I was filled with hate, and then Jesus came. I was really wrestling with addiction, and then Jesus came into my life. My marriage was tough, but then Jesus came into my life. Life was good, and everything was perfect, but then Jesus came into my life. That's Matthew's story. And I bet you it's your story in some way. Maybe not an adult conversion, and that does happen, and we do hope that happens as we expand our ministry here. But maybe it happened to you later in life. I knew Jesus all my life, but then he really came into my life, and now I'm different. You know what? And what was it that made a difference in Matthew's life, and in Lee's life, and in your life? It's Jesus saying, come, follow me. Don't merely study about me. Don't merely admire me. Follow me. You know, I love theology. But you know what I also love is just reading the Bible and getting to know the ways of Jesus. You and I are Lutheran Christians, most of us here, and we love Paul's theology. But you know, I love Paul's heart for the lost. I wish we had Paul's heart for the lost as much as we love Paul's theology. He wanted people to come to know Jesus and simply learn to follow Jesus. Not just study about him, but learn about him. And he will influence your life for the good. In today's lesson, what you'll find out is that Jesus has mercy for sinners, all sorts of sinners. And it comes by simply following. There's a man who named Neil who backed up his car one day to pick up some groceries. And as he was driving home, he noticed a little yellow VW Bug. Remember those? The Volkswagen Beetle following really close to him all the way home. When he turned, the VW Bug turned. And this continued all the way until he turned into his driveway. And the VW Bug followed him. Once he got out of his car, he noticed why. When he was at the drugstore and he had backed into the parking place, he actually latched on to the VW Bug's bumper. And wherever he went, the VW went. That's what it means to follow Jesus. Wherever he leads, we follow. And read the Gospels, read the story of Jesus to find that. And what does follow mean? It basically means, I want you to know that I want to be your friend. And more. Friendship with God is something that is in the Bible. Moses spoke to God as to a friend. God called Abraham his friend. David was a man after God's own heart. Friendship with God is not something new, but it becomes more evident in the life of Jesus. And how do we become friends with Jesus? Trusting the message that he loves us and he forgives us and he will eventually die for us. It's simply by trusting in this message. You know, every day, do you realize you trust people in small ways? If you go to the dentist and you open your mouth, aren't you being very trusting that that person knows what they're doing, right? When that waitress goes and gets you your drink and brings it back, you're trusting that it's the right drink and it's not been poisoned, right? Every day you exercise trust. And trust, when it comes to faith matters, is to believe. To trust is more than just belief up here. It's trusting Jesus is the way to get you to heaven. Matthew invited lots of people to come to know that. We're in a process right now starting a Spanish service, but we have a bilingual invite so that you that have been kind of hesitant, you can speak to a friend with an invite card. Invite them to church. Invite friends to church. When we were over at having lunch with Pastor Wilfredo recently, we met a young lady from Ecuador who was our wait staff, and one of us inquired about if she had a church, and she said she does, but her mother doesn't. And her mother, who lives in another town, is looking for a church. Wilfredo snapped right to that, and I don't know what the conversation was because my Spanish ain't good, you know? My English ain't good either, but and you took it with that, and that lady may do something. I believe Lorraine, with the caterer, has discovered a Hispanic family that doesn't have a church, just by inquiring of the food. So who knows? Who knows? You know, people take those invite cards, so please consider that. You know. My final story is told by a Hispanic pastor named Luis Palau. He died just a few years ago. Luis Palau was the Spanish Billy Graham, and he worked with Dr. Billy Graham for many years. Grew up in Portland, but he was Hispanic, and he was a great evangelist, bilingual, okay? One day, this was the question in the story that he introduced in one of his books. Supposing there is a God, would he accept a woman like me? That was her question. Her name was Maria. Maria had made an appointment to see me, but under false pretenses. She claimed that she wanted an interview for a job. But as soon as she entered my office, Maria made it clear. She was the secretary to the Communist Party back in Ecuador. She denounced everything having to do with God or with Jesus. Her bitterness overwhelmed her. But I listened carefully and replied gently to everything Maria said. Soon, Maria was telling me her whole life story, a tale of pain and suffering and sin. And she ended it all with one question. Supposing there is a God, would he accept a woman like me? I did not hesitate. I turned to Hebrews 10:17. Their sins and lawless deeds I will remember no more, says the Lord. Maria tried to explain it once again, all the sins that she had committed. And I counted again. Their sins and their lawless deeds I will remember no more. 17 more times Maria tried to explain that she was unworthy to receive forgiveness. And 17 times I told her, their sins and lawless acts I will remember no more. After the 17th time, Maria bowed her head, wept, and put her faith in Jesus. Jesus says it's not the healthy who need a physician. but the sick. And if you are sick with sin, and aren't we all, to varying degrees, God offers you medicine. The Holy Communion in the early church was called the medicine of immortality. It was this medicine that if you took it, because it latches you up to Jesus, will give you eternal life. So, if you've got sin, past, way in the past, or very recent, come with those sins and receive the Lord's medicine. As the pastor and the elder says, this is given for you for the forgiveness of sins. And now go home saying, you know, I used to be one way, but now I'm different because Jesus came by. In his name, amen.